What is a future party doing here in the present if it's from the future? That's a good question. There we go. Is that better for you guys? Didn't hurt any necks, did I? Is that better for you guys? Sure. Give some hearts out if you can. Looks alright.
There you go. No.
No. Mid-drink.
Can you get James in the periscope?
Okay.
Love you guys with doing performances.
15 people, that's like the biggest audience I've had. Send some love hearts out. You guys are liking what you're saying?
Again, can you...
Yeah, we're up to 15 now. That's a pro camera, right? Way too cool. Classic. Miracle glass cover. What do you stand for? Stand for the future. Is James going to tell us how should public transport systems in the future?
Most probably.
Yeah, so what do we stand for?
Education, science,
Technology, innovation.
innovation.
Yeah, we really need to double our science budget. Because right now it's like, what, it's way below the central country. Yeah, go to futureparty.org.au. Future Transport New South Wales toll roads, private toll roads everywhere.
And driverless cars.
And driverless cars, of course. That's right. We won't need to go
Good
so
evening,
many
everyone,
roads.
and welcome to the Federation of Willoughby Progress Association's Meet the Candidates. Now, they're all here except one, and I'll get to that in a moment. My name is Don Swanell, and I'm the president of the Federation of Willoughby Progress Associations. And most of the people you see helping us around here are either on the committee or have come from other progress associations to give a hand. Just before we start, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. On behalf of the Federation of Willoughby Progress Associations, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Camaragal people, their elders, spirits and ancestors. Thank you. All right. Now, without any further ado, we have a lot to get through. All 12. Firstly, I'm going to introduce everyone to you. Because of the time constraints, I'm just going to say their name and the parties they're in. They are seated in ballot paper order. We're starting at the top with Lou Pollard from the Art Party. William Bourke, Sustainable Population Party. Sam Kennard, Liberal Democrats. Kerry BROMSON, Voluntary Euthanasia Party. James Jansson, Future Party. Arthur Chesterfield-EVANS, The Greens. I do hope I have the pronunciation right. Maryann BEREGI. Right. Let me try that again. Maryann BEREGI, Independent. Silvana NERO, Christian Democratic Party. Nile's good. Robert James Marks, Palmer United Party.
Is he very tuna?
Yeah, that was a
Trent ZIMMERMAN, Liberal. Stephen RUFF, Independent.
That's the love for the rough. That's the rough life.
Thank you. How many of these people?
That's so 80s.
Stephen Ruff, independent. And Luke Freeman, Australian Cyclists Party. Unfortunately, the 13th candidate, Tim BOHM, from the Bullet Train for Australia Party, sent us an email saying, look, thank you very much for inviting me, but I do live in Canberra. Have you had a bullet train? Very nice, very nice.
Where's bed?
There's probably a vote in that. All right. Okay, now, how we're going to do this is, firstly, there's going to be one question asked of each candidate. It will be the same question as we start to each candidate. You have 2 minutes to answer this question. At 1 minute 50 seconds you will hear, at 2 minutes you will hear, and your mic will be taken away from you. All right. So I think without any further ado, I think I've covered everything here. I think we might just get on with it, and we'll just have little surprises during the evening.
Do we win a prize?
Well, yes, you may get the seat. The first question, and we'll go with the first candidate. You move. It's 2 minutes. Why are you standing in this election?
I'm standing in this election because it's time we had some different voices in Parliament. The electorate have told me in the last 2 weeks that they want a change, they want some fresh voices, they want policies considered rather than party politics, and that's why I put my hand up. I want a different Australia for my children, I want a fairer Australia, I want affordable housing. The Arts Party want a more cultured, creative Australia. So that's why I'm standing in this election.
Thank you. Second, William Bourke. Why are you standing in this election?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for putting on the evening. Thanks very much everyone for turning up and partaking in local democracy. I am William Bourke from the Sustainable Population Party. I am a local. I live in Wollstonecraft, have lived in the area for 20 years. I am someone who runs a small business in the area as well. So I know the local electorate, I know what we need, and I know how to make it better, not bigger. Ladies and gentlemen, population growth is the underlying cause of many of our growing local problems. I'm campaigning to save the Royal North Shore Hospital from Liberal Party land sell-offs. It's wonderful to see Dr. Ruff also campaigning on this issue, and I voted for him in the state election. But the issue must be tackled at the cause, not just treating the symptoms. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also running to provide more affordable housing for renters and first home buyers like myself. I am on an average income in Australia. I love my job, but it's an average income and I cannot afford to buy a home in the area. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure all of the children in the area have a place at the local school or the local childcare centre. 15 years ago, I'm told that there was an average of 350 students at each of the schools in the area. Today, just 15 years later, it's 1,000 children at each of the same schools. So we need better schools, not bigger enrolments. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm campaigning passionately to stop the high-rise overdevelopment in the area, give the say back to the local community. And to tie all of this together, my final point is a sustainable population with immigration back at the 20th century average of 70,000 instead of 200,000 per year. Thank you.
I'm Sam Kennard, Managing Director of Kennard Self Storage. It's a good question for me as to why I'm running. It's certainly not something I need to do, but it is something I definitely want to do. Standing in this election, and more noticeably, the debate in Australia has left, and we're not talking about the real issues that we should be, in that government spending is growing at a rapid rate. It has been growing from 10 years ago from $240 billion to $430 billion. That's 79% in 10 years, 79.9% average per annum. So I'm standing for smaller government, lower taxes and less regulation. It seems the major parties have left this space wide open. The Liberals have forgotten that this is what they should be standing for. The Labor Party and the Greens have always stood for a degree of this, and it's a sad situation that I have to come here. Sorry, it's a great situation I have to come here, but it's sad that the Liberals have left this area untouched. I believe the government can be, it is riddled with waste, and we not often enough talk about key measures, key performance indicators, and key result areas in government programs. It's all too often talking about spending growth, and we should come back to what these programs are trying to achieve. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kerry. I'm standing for the Voluntary Euthanasia Party. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm here as probably a one-issue party, as people might say, but like Rick Xenophol, I have an opinion which I would like to take to the government, and that opinion is that there should be law reform, and none of the major parties are taking this issue seriously when 85% of the population want it. It's a serious issue for the most mature people, and even probably people who are ill and not well do want an option in our society. So we as the population need to vote accordingly so that that choice can be given to us. And if I was elected, I would stand for the people, I would put forward proposals and listen to the population so that their stories, whatever they're wanting for issues, changes in government, because like most things, the governments aren't listening to us in any shape or form. They are tending to make choices. They're tending to make choices which aren't in favour of what the general public want. They're making choices which are a standard choice for party policy, and people have to follow that party policy, whereas an independent can actually make choices and help what the people of that electorate want to be passed. So I'm standing here as a member who will look after the things that you want in our governments, the things that you need, and as well as voluntary euthanasia. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jansson and I'm the leader of the Future Party. The reason why I'm standing in this election is because I care about people. I care about the children of this electorate. In the North Sydney electorate, 21% of people are under the age of 20. These are the people who are attending schools and universities, and they are not being looked after by the current government. We had suggestions for a number of reforms that would have made school funding fairer and larger under the Gonski reforms, and they haven't been implemented. And the only thing that the Liberal government has been prepared to do is to deregulate university fees and make it extremely expensive for your children and your grandchildren to attend university. We think that this is a horrible direction for our education to be taking. The other thing that our party is very passionate about is scientific research. We ran in the 2013 election and we were a little bit disappointed that the Liberal Party was elected, but we had some hope. The first thing that the Liberal Party did was they got rid of the Science Minister. And that was an absolute disgrace. And that act was not done by Tony Abbott alone. It was done by Malcolm Turnbull when he was in the ministry at the same time. So every time he says that he's pro-science, don't listen to him. He helped remove the science minister. We had 1,400 jobs gone from the CSIRO since the Liberal Party has been elected, and Turnbull has not committed to returning any of those jobs or any of that funding. If the Future Party were elected, we'd double scientific funding from $9.2 billion to $18.4 billion. And we do that because that will improve our quality of life in the future. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. I'm Arthur Chesterfield-Evans. I'm a Green, and I'm standing because we're having a by-election because Mr. Hockey's taken his 2 salaries and hopped off to New York and joined the by-election. I want to give you a choice so that you don't have to put in another Liberal. You can actually do something different. You think you've got Malcolm riding the dinosaur, hopefully changing things, wondering, does he want to change it? And could he, if he wanted to? And finding, oh gosh, no, perhaps he can't on that issue, perhaps he can't on that issue, oh dear, perhaps he can't on that issue. But it's time for a new look at things. I don't believe the Liberals have any commitment to democracy. They took us into the war in Iraq, although 74% of Australians didn't want to go there, and now we have record refugees streaming across Europe as a consequence of the muddled Western policy in the Middle East. I believe we should get out of there. If you want to stop the refugees, why don't you stop bombing where they live? As it is, we're being more cruel to the refugees. We're spending more money being cruel to refugees than the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission of Refugees, spends on all the refugees in the world. And I believe that's a disgrace for Australia. At a state level, there's no respect for the voters. Everybody knows that nobody wants to amalgamate the councils, but the government's going ahead anyway. I don't care that's what you think. At a local level, Mr. Zimmerman parachuted in here with 42 votes from head office. The local Liberals don't even want him. And if you go door knocking, you get a hell of a hard time. You can't get away from the Liberals because they're telling you how awful it all is. So I want to give you a choice. The Greens are the effective opposition. Where's the Labor Party? Well, they didn't want a number to their unpopularity. If they'd got 9% or something, imagine the trouble Shorten would have been in. So they didn't come, did they? They didn't front, right? Now, the Greens have a comprehensive set of policies. We just last weekend got our climate policy, which is to have 90% renewables by 2030 and all costly. Thank you very much. Ready for Paris. We believe in no fracking and no new coal mines. We're not going to wreck up our land. And at the local level, we want to support TAFE, schools, and you guys.
Good evening. My name's Maryann, and I'm running as an independent. My reason for running is to... Oh, sorry. My name's Maryann, and I'm running as an independent. Yes?
Yes.
I'm running to effect change and to bring a strong, independent voice to the people of North Sydney. We all know what a good, strong, independent candidate can do, and for too long, the North Sydney electorate has been taken for granted by the Liberal Party. And this by-election is an example of the way in which the people of North Sydney are treated. It is a by-election we shouldn't be having. If Mr. Hockey wanted the job in the US, he shouldn't have run at the last election. It is absolutely a disgrace and an insult to the people of North Sydney to be going to an election on the 5th of December, 3 weeks out from Christmas, only to again have to go to the polls mid next year or even in March if Mr. Turnbull doesn't want to take his next budget, if he wants to go before the next budget in May. I'm a local. I grew up in Castle Craddock. I went to school at St Thomas's in Willoughby, and I currently live in Neutral Bay. I'm currently a councillor on North Sydney Council, and like Arthur, I believe that democracy has gone out the window at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. At the state level, and I know it's not a state issue, however, democracy is a federal issue, and the state government do not have any mandate to force local councils to amalgamate without asking the people that elected them. At the federal level, I look at the pre-selection process that the Liberals went through. It was a farce. For all their mantra about gender equality in politics They threw it out the window, and we have Joe Hockey staffer. I don't think that that should be a good reason for running for this seat. And we may not be able to change the government, but we can change the way North Sydney is treated.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Silvana, NERO, and this is my 6th stand-in as a candidate. I always win because I'm still in the run and I'm still here to represent for the people, by the people, of the people, not just on a local level, but on a federal level as well. Our real problems today are not just economic, they're not even political. Our real problems today are a lack of good character, values and common decency, and I want to restore these back into public policy. How do I intend to do that? Well, let's have a look at the local issues. First of all, for the hospital, the Royal North Shore Hospital, we don't want to sell off the land and we don't want to lease the land there because we're going to need extensions for extra beds and to look after the patients. And that's a priority. People, the wealth is in the health of the people. We must look at that. Let's look where else is our wealth. Our wealth is in our education system. Let's look after our children. In North Sydney, we have demountables in school playgrounds because of the overdevelopment that's taken place. We've got to stop prioritising developers. We need to be prioritising people, children, schools and education. Let's get our priorities right here. Also, we're looking at things like prioritising buildings, which I've spoken about, and you can see the high-rise buildings going up. We need, which I said, the TAFEs, the privatisation of TAFEs. I've been an educator for 30 years. We need to put the educated, the right people in the position, not people that come in as an investment in a business. And also I'm going to be looking at one law for all Australians, and let's do what Mary McKillop said, never see a need without doing something about it.
You guys reach reading the chat?
I feel that's a hard act to follow. Good evening, I'm Robert Marks. Yes, I'm a local. Yes. All these parties are promising the same thing. It's really simple. We've got costed policies. I'm a man on the ground and I'm a local. And I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm not going to make promises. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Real policies. Number one, we're going to get the women's refuge back to stop domestic violence. 2014, there were 78 refuges specifically for women that were suffering from domestic violence. They're gone. We're down to 14 now in the state. 14. And guess what? Only half of them operate after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So, it is. And why am I running? Because I'm 46 and I've got 2 kids and I'm old enough to remember when this country was the lucky country. Okay? Lucky left a long time ago. I'd like to bring it back for fear of sounding corny. Okay? Parliament Party's always been about small government, less interference in daily lives, raising the standard of living. How do we do that? Less taxes. How do we do it? We don't amalgamate councils. Why? Because they're the true voice of the people. Federal and state governments are too big to listen. State doesn't move quick enough. But at the local council level, your councillors will listen and get things done. So why do they want to smash it up? Okay? Think about it. It's a big, big choice. Everything from our hospitals, our infrastructure, how do you make employment? You build on them. What does that do? That raises the standard of living. Everybody's talking about the GST going up 5%. Wrong. Anyone who passed maths, it's a 50% increase. 50% increase. It's going from 10 to 15%. You know, if you had more money in your pocket at the end of the week, what would you do? I bet you'd spend it. Guess what? More spending, more activity in the economy, you collect more GST. You don't have to put it up. Thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to more questions this evening.
My name is Trent. I'm the Liberal candidate for the by-election, and I thank God and the Federation for organising tonight, which I think is important. I'm standing in this by-election for one reason alone, and that's because I want to serve the community that's been my home and that I loved for the last 14 years. And community service is an ethos that I learned at the feet of my parents. My father was a school teacher and something of a Mr. Chips, and I saw the way that he and my mother really cared and nurtured those young students, often in trouble, even in a private school. And I've been in this area now for 14 years, and community service has been part of my life. I served on North Sydney Council when it was a little bit more peaceful for 8 years. I served, I'm currently a president of my local Rotary Club in North Sydney. I've worked with our veterans organisations, I've worked with our youth services like Phoenix Housing, Crow's Nest that I've been supportive of, served on my local school council and been on one of our local community centre boards as well. So for me, politics is the ultimate form of community service, and it's the ultimate way in which you can give something back to your area. And my priorities, if I'm elected, are making sure that we protect our local environment, that we protect the character of our suburbs, that we provide the services that our residents need and provide the jobs, particularly that our young people need, in what I think is the future economy for Australia. And I also say that I do want to be part of Malcolm Turnbull's team in Canberra, because Malcolm is a friend of mine and I consider him to be someone who will go down as one of the best Prime Ministers this country has ever had. And I think that the great thing about Malcolm is he's setting such a positive and optimistic agenda for Australia. He's changed the tone of politics. And we need to focus on those industries that post the mining boom are going to drive our jobs and prosperity. I've worked for the last 4 years as the Deputy CEO of the National Industry Association, where my speciality has been working in public transport policy. And can I say that it's getting our cities right and making sure that we have the infrastructure that we need that is part of Malcolm's agenda and will be certainly part of mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen Ruff. I live at North Shore Hospital and I have for the last 35 years. Now, a man's home is his castle and my castle is under attack. I've lost the first battle against the state government, but I plan on winning the war. You need to know that the Federal Minister for Health has announced that that 1/3 of health spending in this country is wasted, and much of that on the medical schedule of benefits with its misuse or inappropriate use. Now, the total spending on health in this country is $165 billion a year. 1/3 of that is $50 billion a year. Over 10 years, that's $500 billion. You need to know that's at the same order of magnitude as the United States government bailout of their economy in the global financial crisis. I believe that the mismanagement at federal level of this is probably the reason why the state minister is trying to sell off all our schools and all our hospitals, because they don't have the money for infrastructure. You need to know that we're all buying 72 Joint Strike Fighters at a cost of $16 billion. They have a combat range of 600 miles. I don't know where the other fighters are that these strike fighters are going to be attacking that we need. They're going to have pilots, 144 of them, each with a helmet that costs $770,000. I want to take, the first thing Justin Trudeau did when he got into power was cancel the contract of their 54. I want to cancel our 72. I want to take the $16 billion and turn it into 100,000 lots of $160,000 to give to first home buyers. I want to put $100,000 worth of Crown land with it, get them to put $200,000 with it, and they can buy their first home, of which the Commonwealth will have a 50% equity, so that when it's sold, it comes back to us. I want to actually change the transport structure so that we don't have more cars, but a transit system that's equivalent to the communication system that we have in the 21st century. Thank you.
Just falling over the edge here. My name is Luke Freeman, and I've lived on the north for decades. I am running because, quite simply, I think that Australia is a place of short-lived, happy lives, which have the freedom to live healthy lives, and we should have the ability to dictate how we do so. I'm running for the Australian Cyclists Party because I think that evidence trumps ideology when it comes to policy making. And our poorly planned cities with inadequate transport options are costing us our time, our money, and our health. My goal is for Australia to be a healthier, safer, and more productive nation, achieved by building livable cities and helping communities to be better connected, more livable, and more affordable. There is no controversy about the wisdom of increasing active transport. It's not a point of ideological difference, it's not a huge spending challenge either. The problem is, it's largely ignored. We're about to put up about thousands of new apartments just near where I live in Langford. there's currently no real plan with how to deal with that. St Leonard's is going to probably triple in population. But if anyone has been on the Pacific Highway, you know that that is a car park. And there is really, really no way of getting from A to B in any kind of achievable time. We are way underspending in our public transport. We're instead spending between $3,500 and $4,000 per Australian per Sydney-sider on WestConnects, and spending less than $5 a head on bike paths and footpaths and connecting people up to public transport. You might say this is a state issue, but the federal government has a long history of putting money up and getting state and local governments to match that. In the 1970s, about 80% of kids went to school by cycling or walking. Now it's less than 20%.
Thank you, Luke. Just before I go on, I'd just like to welcome the Sky Network and the ABC, who are here this evening. Welcome, and thank you for coming along. The next question. This again will be the same question to each of the candidates. You have 2 minutes to answer this question, with the one ding going off with 10 seconds to go. So far, so good. This one is on the national debt. Bear with me. During the global financial crisis, Australia was largely protected from the fallout because the government of the day elected to invest heavily in infrastructure. On an ongoing basis, how would you advocate? Spend big and go into more debt, or reduce spending and let the economy slow? Please give the rationale for your preference. Anybody would like to hear that again? Do let me know. During the global financial crisis, Australia was largely protected from the fallout because the government of the day elected to invest heavily in infrastructure. On an ongoing basis, how would you advocate? Spend big and go into more debt, or reduce spending and let the economy slow? Please give the rationale for your preference.
Thank you for the question. I believe I'm going first this time. Again, I'm William from the Sustainable Population Party. I believe that the question offers a false choice. I believe that the question offers the premise that we should always be growing bigger and bigger and providing more and more infrastructure. And we've reached what's called diseconomies of scale in our economy. Every unit of output, such as roads, which we now have to tunnel, rail, which we now have to tunnel, schools, which we have to go high-rise or buy back land to buy on, everything is much, much more expensive to deliver that infrastructure within a built city because all of the land is gone. So the point is to think better, not bigger, and avoid the budget-crippling infrastructure costs that are causing rapid growth in debt, the sale of our precious public assets, and the reduction in spending of the government. So we can avoid all of this by thinking about stabilising the population and not trying to add in all of this extra infrastructure which is infinitely more expensive per unit of output. So certainly I would be stabilising the population and avoiding all of the debt and the costs. We had the infrastructure that coped some time ago, 10, 15 years ago, with the growth in the immigration and population growth to triple the historic level, and without the spending on the infrastructure, we have less hospital beds per person, less classrooms per person, less sporting facilities per person. So let's tackle the root cause. Let's not just deal with ever-growing problems and symptoms. Thank you.
Sam Kennard. I'm not sure I entirely agree with the basis of the question as well. I don't think the government spending was the saviour of our economy. I think there are other attributes, particularly China's behaviour through that period, that helped us. the spending that we did undertake, I don't think was either wisely done, largely, or needed. The Pink Bats program down in Northwood, a ferry wharf for middle-aged, wealthy, middle-class men and women going to work, was rebuilt, and I thought it was perfectly fine. Roads in the area through the local councils were nicely resealed. I'm not sure all of that needed to happen. And government spending, as I believe, has been growing too quickly. In the GFC period, the revenue decline wasn't as dramatic as we were led to believe. In 2008-9, government's revenue declined by only $2 billion. It went from $292 billion to $290 billion. The following year it went down by another $8 billion. So the total decline, and then it started to go back up, the total decline over about a $300 billion budget was $10 billion. We were not seeing a huge collapse in revenue, but we did see a huge increase in spending. What that left us was a growing debt, a debt that our kids are going to have to pay. Debt is just deferred tax that our kids will have to pay. So I think the future does not include spending and kicking the can down the road. This generation has to accept that the spending has to stop, and through lower spending we can enjoy lower taxes.
Kerry BROMSON again. I have a slightly different thought pattern altogether. Most of our growth financially in Australia is when we've had a bigger immigration program. Because with bigger immigration, we have more people to do the work. We need to develop programs in Australia that bring jobs which bring income, which then brings revenue. I honestly believe that Australia needs to rebuild itself. We've taken away our car industry, most secondary and third industries we have taken from this country. We transport everything overseas. Therefore, we have nothing to build here, nothing to develop, nothing to grow. We're selling off all our primary at this stage. Our primary industries are in poor states at the moment because we haven't looked after them. We're talking about our wheat industry, our cattle industry, all of those sorts of things. And unfortunately, our governments haven't looked after these things. In most countries, we have to look, in this country, we have to look at starting to rebuilding ourselves from the ground up. And that's looking at our food, looking at our wheat, cattle, those industries to begin with, and then turning them into secondary and third industries. Because within Australia, we need to grow, to produce the money, to give us the income that we need to develop this country. We already have the population. Cutting back spending doesn't help, because we already have the population, and the population is going to continue to grow. So if we don't bring industry back to this country, we don't have income. So that's what I think should happen to Australia.
My name is Jansson, Future Party. I like this question because it allows me to talk about two of my favourite topics. Firstly, immigration. Immigration, I think, is a great thing. When we think about our great projects, we think back to times like the Snowy Hydro scheme. And who was that built by? That was built by immigrant labour, and that immigrant labour came into our country and formed part of the fantastic country that we have today. They brought value with them. And when they were paid money to build those infrastructure projects, they put that back into the economy. This is a really important issue for the people of North Sydney, and the reason is because we have a very quickly ageing demographic in this region. If we don't have enough workers who are young and of working age and able-bodied, we will not have the taxes to support our older people into their retirement. That means that pensions will be threatened, and it also means that your super portfolios will be under threat when there's no one else to pour additional super money into those super portfolios. So this is actually a really important issue to get more migrant workers into this country. We'll improve our economy by doing it. But there's another issue around taxation which I think is really important to discuss here, and that's the capital gains tax discount. Most people actually pay pay more tax in the dollar than Australia's richest, who get the majority of their earnings from capital gains. If you hold on to an asset for 12 months, your tax rate on the gains on that asset decreases by 50%, which means your tax rate goes from 46% to 23%, which is lower than anyone who's earning over $37,000 per year. It's a disgrace, it's bringing up the price of property, and it's destroying our budgets. Thank you.
Yeah. Chesterfield Evans for the Greens. The Greens believe that we have to live within a balanced budget. You can't simply increase your debt, and you must not fund your debt by flogging off assets progressively, which the government does, flogging off the Port of Darwin, the rail, the poles and wires, the farm industry. It just goes on and on. We have to stop selling things. We believe that the crisis at the moment is a crisis of revenue rather than of spending. In fact, that's the fact. Australia rode out the global financial crisis largely because of the boom in sales of commodities to China, particularly coal and iron ore. And the Chinese, it might be noted, were very courageous and had a growth rate of almost 50% of their capital. It was a remarkable effort, and they did that and actually carried the world in terms of growth for quite some time. And we were the beneficiaries of that. At that time, as was written in quite a thoughtful article in The Independent, Saturday paper it was, which pointed out that the problem was that John Howard gave tax concessions at the time of the commodities boom, and those tax concessions have continued even though the boom has stopped. And so we have a revenue problem. 90% of those tax concessions went to the wealthiest people. No one complained because 10% also went to the poorer people. But the Greens believe we have to save some money. We thought perhaps no wars would be a good place to start. No strike fighters, as Steve has said, and perhaps no diesel fuel rebates to subsidise fossil fuels. We think that there have to be, some of the tax concessions of John Howard have to be wound back, and some of the taxes have to be brought back. We are great believers in the carbon tax and the resources rental tax. The carbon tax will help our environment. The resources rental tax will mean people who are chugging off with iron ore have to pay something. We're concerned about foreign companies not paying their share of tax through various loopholes. We want that fixed as well, and something has to be done about capital gains and negative gearing because it's putting too much money into real estate. We want long-term projects with sustainable energy, which we believe will give Australia the expertise and the money for the future.
Thank you. I agree that the premise of the question is either spend big with big debt or reduce spending and slow the economy. I think there's another option. One is to look at the amount of waste that government has. It is enormous, and Steve has already identified it in health, it's in education, it's everywhere we look. And when we talk about the global financial crisis, it wasn't so much the spend, but the quality of the spend. It went into things like pink bats, $900 checks, buildings in schools that then 3 years later were knocked down. So it's not about the spend, it is about the quality of the spend and whether the spend can actually then have a revenue stream to pay for it. We shouldn't be frightened of having debt if we can manage the debt. It's the debt that you incur when you actually are acquiring nothing and have no income stream attached to it. But one of the first things I would say is that we need to reduce the size of government. We are way over-governed in this country. For the size of Australia, we have 3 levels of government: federal, state and local. And local is always under attack. However, we have 8 health ministers. We have 8 education ministers. We have 8 ministers for everything, 1 federal and 7 in the states and the territories. And still, we can't get it right. So what I would be doing, and government has never been so big. We have never had such a large public service. And that is where one of the issues that we should be addressing is. What I would like to see is more of a federal and a regional government. And I know that's a constitutional issue, but I think we should be looking at, before we're looking at putting up the GST, we should be looking at the quality of the spend.
I'm looking at more of a conservative government. If we look in 2007 when Kevin Rudd was actually leading this recession and boosting the economy through the pink bats and buildings and school halls, church halls, we could see that he was using the money that it actually was built up from the Howard government in the sense that the coffers were there, the money was there. So I do see that it's important that we don't have governments that come in and use all that money and spend it all and then just pump it into the community so that when we have a rainy day we actually don't have the money to sustain us. We actually have wonderful economy in this country to sustain us. There should never be a fear of economy and things going wrong. If the governments actually budget correctly and look after the people with those budgets and put it where it should be, that's a very good thing. For example, if we look at the Liverpool plains that are being attacked at the moment with coal mining, that the government's trying to bring coal mining into the Liverpool plains, the sustainability there, we've got wheat crops, we've got lentils, we've got grazing there, that kind of an economy and sustaining those farmers and looking after the farmers and looking after employment for our teenagers and industry and developing industry. We took out the factories out of this country that were sustaining work for migrants and lower income earning families who couldn't speak English in this nation, and it sustained them. Let's look at what we have. Agreed. We have enough wealth in this nation. We don't need to be looking outside this nation. Let's look at renewable, sustainable energy and look after the coffers with a conservative government.
The question is about debt.
There's a few things that we have to put in perspective, and I'll make it on a dollar basis so it's easy to think about. For every dollar that the country earns, we owe 10 cents, number one. The world's biggest economy, such as the United States, they owe something like 70 cents. First world countries like Japan owe $1.10.
That's 2 yawns in 3 minutes.
When you've been in business, you understand one thing. Sometimes you've got to borrow money to make money. I'm sure Sam can identify with that.
Oh, something good.
You've got to borrow money to make money. That doesn't say we don't have to be responsible. The other thing everyone's touched on tonight, they're 100% right, is efficiency. Why do we need strike fighter aircraft that go 6,000 miles in one direction? They're going to fall in the ocean. It's a common sense approach. If we just use common sense and logic, you'll realise that we can spend money, create employment, have infrastructure, which creates employment, and lower taxes, which will leave more money in people's pocket, so they spend it, and they'll help other industries. It's a very, very simple formula. It's been costed around the world. There's no reason why we have to stop spending, and there's no reason why we have to borrow big. There is a happy medium, and as I said, it all boils down to common sense, and it all boils down to efficiency. It's that simple. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Can I say that I think the premise of the question is partly wrong, in that I think that the stimulus packages that were introduced by the Rudd government were important, but they went too far and the money was rushed out the door too quickly, so we actually saw a lot of that money wasted. So I think that it was important that we had a stimulus package, and as one of the other speakers said, that was made possible during the GFC and earlier during the Asian financial crisis because we had a healthy budget at the time. And I say that I think that it's absolutely imperative that we make sure that federal government spending is sustainable and that we do aim to get, during the good times, the budget back into surplus, because we need those funds for rainy days when there are a problem that we need to address. Can I also say, with one qualification, that we should also be prepared to spend debt on infrastructure projects that are going to improve the economy and improve the productivity of our cities and the economy overall as we move forward. But if you look at the current situation, we're currently spending $32 billion a day on interest rate payments. We're actually spending $100 million more a day than we're getting in revenue. And that's not sustainable in the long term. So we need a path back to surplus. We've got to do it in a way that doesn't create a shock to the Australian economy. But it's going to be tough because so little of the federal government's budget these days can be described as discretionary spending, which is why getting the budget back to surplus is never an easy task. The Liberal government, the Turnbull government, has a pathway forward, which is seeing over the next 3 years the budget deficit reduced to, I think in 18-19, it's currently predicted to be around $6.9 billion. That's an important strategy, and it's a strategy that we need to keep in place so that we're not spending money on interest repayments, that we've got the fiscal position to withstand shocks to the system, and that we don't end up with a debt burden which under Labor's trajectory would have within 40 years been equivalent to 122% of GDP.
Thank you. Two misconceptions to clear up. Firstly, the Joint Strike Fighter's got a combat radius of 600 miles, not 6,000, which means that we can fight people in Brisbane and Melbourne, but no release. The second misconception is that the financial package of the Ruff-Gillard era was responsible for saving us from the global financial crisis. It wasn't. It was an initiative by Paul Keating, embraced by John Howard, called APRA. The Australian Prudential Regulation Authority made our financial institutions, including the one that insures me for medical indemnity, and I know all about it because out of the blue, when APRA introduced its requirements for my insurance company to have enough assets to make sure they could actually meet a debt, my insurance company couldn't actually function. So the federal government had to guarantee us 70% of the workforce, or we couldn't work in public hospitals, until they worked out a solution, and the solution was to, in fact, level me paying $120,000 a year to protect myself for legal action against me by you. They levelled me with a bill called an incurred but not reported debt of $248,000 because we weren't actually putting enough behind. Now that happened to every financial institution, such that when the crisis hit, introduced by Keating, embraced by Howard, all of our financial institutions were in a situation to be able to combat it. The bailout was a nonsense. They might as well have given the money away. The governance of the pink bats and the school spending is an embarrassment. What we actually need for the future is better governance of Commonwealth spending and state spending, and more encouragement for private sector spending.
I think we all get it. There is a major false premise in the question. We're quite simply addicted. We're addicted to spending money on winning votes, like building another tollway out to Western Sydney at $16 billion, instead of consulting experts and looking at the evidence. Just listen carefully while I quote from the Infrastructure Australia report. This is the government's own report that they've done very little about. Australia has a true gambler's addiction to roads. The money spent is not a rational investment. Goes on to say that we're laggards compared to the rest of the world. They follow on with saying, in the most urbanised nation on earth, getting transport right in Australia's cities is a major consideration for economic performance in these places. Smart planning and choices will enlarge the effective size of the labour market and of the goods and ideas market, thus increasing productivity and output. So, what do? I work in technology. I work at a startup. I work in innovation. Innovation is where I think our nation can be strong. We have a history of it. You look at the great Australian new inventors, you look at the history of innovations in this country, it's what's kept us alive, which is why the CSIRO funding cut is just disgraceful. You look at things like our NBN, where I am sitting on a call with the Philippines and we're apologising for Australia's internet being the reason for the call breaking out. We've got to get productive. We've got to not spend so much time getting to and from work. We've got to not be sitting around wasting our health away as it's costing us in the range of $14 billion a year on inactivity, let alone all the cost of actually losing loved ones early or having people killed early, because the number one death for accidents is on our roads. Luke Wah from the Arts Party. I think Maryann hit the nail on the head. There's
too much money in too few hands in Australia, and we've taken the money out of education, we've taken the money out of the creative thinkers, we've taken the money away from the scientists. We want to be the clever country again, with fresh ideas for the 21st century. We want to educate our children for that, and we need to put money into that. We've got too many pigs with their noses in the trough. We have politicians who go to Canberra and they charge charge about $300 a night while they live in their wife's house. We're overgoverned. We have far too many politicians. We need to cut back on all the political spending. There's too many expense accounts. There's too many consultants. There's too many people running focus groups, marketing, all this sort of stuff, advising the government, invoicing the government, money going to people who already have most of the wealth in this country. We need to redistribute the wealth, and we need to make our children clever. We need to change our education system so that we change our children into creative thinkers. The Rudd government, by spending on education, was starting to go down that road. Obviously, there were some schools that were ready, and they benefited from that spend during the global financial crisis, and we need to keep those clever ideas in our country and not lose what is our wealth, the people who have the ideas and the creativity and the great thinkers, because the scientists, they've left the country in droves. They're leaving because we're not spending money on them. We're spending money on the stupid people and not the smart ones. Thank you.
Now, the next lot of questions. Now, these are all different questions. There's 12 of them. And they are going just in the order they were given to me. There's no targeting, there's no nothing. You get a random question. It goes to, again, down the line, ballot line. Lou, you're on your feet again. This one is from... Yeah. This is from public... What are we doing? Why? Good to know. Okay. Now, this question is public consultation. There are varying views on the degree of public consultation that should occur on major projects. Politicians are elected to make decisions, hence we only need minimal public consultation. Public consultation should occur at the policy level, leaving the bureaucracy to get on with the job when projects are proposed. There should be extensive public consultation at every step of the way. What is your policy on public consultation?
I think public consultation is essential. That what we're seeing in New South Wales on a local and state levels, that local councils and local people are saying what they want. They don't want this development, or they want the development cap, this kind of thing. It's going to the state government. The New South Wales Planning Department is overruling what the locals want. We're seeing it right across Sydney, we're seeing it right across Australia, that local decisions are being overruled by the state government, and I think this comes down to over-government again, that we need to strengthen local government. And federally, as Maryann said, we have ministers, we have too many ministers, so we have too many opinions on this. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Can I just have a minute? Sorry. Yes. I think it's vital, but I think what we're seeing is that we're having all these consultations, we're spending all this money on consultation, but then the minister involved, or the state planning department, is not listening to that advice. So I think we're wasting a lot of money on focus groups, on consultation, which is then not listened to. And I think that's where we're wasting a lot of money and a lot of time. But a lot of the consultation is being ignored. A lot of what locals want in particular areas is being ignored. So when we sort out the over-governance issue, I think that we'll get back to what the people want in a particular area, because people are speaking in this electorate and they're telling me what they want, and it's not what the government are doing right now. Thank you.
Your question is on climate change. What methods would you advocate to handle the threat posed by climate change?
Thank you for the question. I was really looking forward to answering the last one because I'm a passionate believer in democracy, and I believe governments should have mandates, and I believe in transparent governance, and there's a lot of vested interests around governments, but we'll move on to this one. I certainly believe that Australia should progress rapidly towards a predominantly renewable energy supply. A sustainable population is one that has an ecological footprint that leaves the environment in the same condition, a better condition that it received it, and passes it on for future generations. We have a number of things in our climate and energy policy at the Sustainable Population Party. As a first step to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, Australia must stabilise its population. As a second step, we must vigorously lobby all other nations to adopt, ensure fair and reasonable global action across the board. So if we have a carbon price, all countries must pay a carbon price, not just Australia, so that we basically pay a price but other people don't pay it. You have to all have a carbon price so that it's equal and we don't just export industry to polluting countries. We must have very significant greenhouse gas reduction targets according to the Climate Change Authority. We must adopt a significant renewable energy target as well, at least 20% by 2020 and up to 100% by 2050. We should have a phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. We should be putting that money into renewable energy and into high-tech manufacturing and a really significant climate change and renewable energy industry. And we should have a moratorium on all fracking across Australia and give local communities a say. We need to think about a sustainable future for Australia, and that's what the Sustainable Population Party does. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Sam, your question's on foreign investment. How would you manage the desire of foreign companies and individuals to invest heavily in Australia's property market and national infrastructure projects?
Thank you. Australia has always relied on foreign investment since the very beginning, and it's nothing to fear. It's always been there. I think there is some sensitivity around particular assets. I think that's largely unfounded. And what we don't know, and I think maybe worthy, is some sort of measure so that we do know that X% of X area is actually owned by a foreigner or not. That would give the argument some clarity and objectivity. But generally, Australia has always enjoyed the investment of foreigners, and that's a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. Port of Darwin, I mean, I was overseas when that happened. It looks a little bit sloppy in the way it was handled. What are we fearing about the Chinese owning the Port of Darwin? I think Border Force is still going to control what comes in and out. If there was a war, I don't think the Chinese would own it anymore. I think it would be nationalised pretty quickly. So I don't know, really, we should fear as much as we said it was, but it's certainly sloppy.
Thank you, Sam. Kerry, your question is on school education funding. Give your reasons why you would or would not support the continuation of Gonski funding for our schools.
Interesting question. Gonski. On principle, I have to say I agree with the Gonski. Sorry, on principle, I think I have to agree with the Gonski report. I don't think that the government of today is putting enough money into our education. I think in society today, our children need to be educated, very well educated. I think education should be free. My major point of our society is that if we have good education and good health, then we develop a country that is literate and therefore informed, and therefore decisions can be made that are of benefit to the country as a whole. If we don't educate our people properly, therefore we have an uneducated population, and therefore we have a poorer people because they're not getting the jobs and are of value to our society. So I think the Gonski report as such, and the concept of it was very good, and the funding of that should have been maintained. But as to how it was all done and how it was being broken up, unfortunately, I don't know. But I think, as I said, I think the basis to all society is good education and good health. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. You're all doing very well, you know. These are curly ones, straight out of the blue to all of you, and it's going very well. You're going to come across all these. Next one, James. Taxation.
Yes.
Do you think changes should be made to the current taxation system? If so, how should it be changed? Can you name the 3 most important changes you would promote?
Take it away, James.
Yes, I can actually. Look, I think it's really important that we get the balance between taxation and the spending that we're doing right. And I think that we can change the taxation system so that we take taxes from people who don't need it as much and make sure that it's redistributed to people who need it more. That doesn't mean free money. That doesn't mean $700 checks in the GFC from Kevin Rudd, signed by him. What it means is that when we adjust our tax system, we make sure that we use it to pay for things like education. And the example that I gave before was the capital gains tax discount. It is an extremely unjust system that the Howard government brought in 1999. It hasn't been around for very long, and people always blame. They always blame negative gearing. But it's not actually negative gearing's fault that our housing prices are going through the roof. Negative gearing has been around since 1982, and the housing prices started to shoot up in 1999, the same time that the capital gains discount came into force. That is the kind of reform that we'd like to bring in. We just get rid of the discount altogether. We think it's extremely unjust that a person such as Palmer, who makes most of his money through capital gains, pays 22.5% on every dollar he brings in, while we're off paying up to 45 cents in the dollar on every dollar that we bring in. It's extremely unjust.
He pays more tax than Woolworths and employs just...
Thank you.
And
go on.
So we would like to reform the superannuation taxation system. In particular, we'd just like to put a cap on how much you have in your super to $2 million for each individual. That's going to be plenty for most people to get through their retirement. You take that money and you put it into your other investments, and you get taxed normally there, but you get for the first $2 million, you get all of the discounts that you currently get. And that's one of the changes that we'd like to bring in. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Please, no interjections. We have a lot of questions, a lot of time. We want to get through all this. Thank you. Now, I don't know what to say. This one has come at you rather easily. I should do it, but well, I can't. This is how it is. It's on health. What would you do to address the social determinants of health and improve public health systems?
Yeah, well, preventive health is extremely important to me. I cut my teeth wanting an exciting life in medicine and getting into intensive care, and I found, when I was honest with myself, that end-stage disease caused by tobacco was the biggest thing in intensive care, and we really couldn't do much about it. The answer was prevention, and so I got involved in the anti-tobacco campaigns for about 20 years, with the group Bugger Up, because more extreme measures were needed to overcome obstructive elements in the political system. In other words, people had lots of money, the tobacco industry gave a lot of money to the government, and the government agreed to do not much. And that went on for 40 years. And I was interested to notice Trent's comment that most budgets isn't discretionary now. What's that mean? It's locked in by vested interests? Is that what he means? A very interesting question. An interesting point. So basically, we have to take on vested interests and we have to change behaviours. At the moment, the junk food people dominate our advertising and what our kids eat. The computer games stop our kids exercising because it's much more interesting to sit in front of the computer. And we have to say, what are our priorities? We've got to sort our priorities, right? We want people to exercise more, to eat more healthy foods, to vaccinate their kids, not to smoke. We're going to have to cut down the alcohol. We're going to have to cut down the drugs. And we need to basically address those things in a systematic and sensible fashion. We have to change the incentives to change behaviour, and we have to not be shy about wanting to do that. The marketers don't care what happens as long as they sell their product. They have a very narrow view. The government has to take a larger view, and I believe we have to act against the alcohol industry. We've got to act against the tobacco industry. We've got to act against the gambling industry, because that causes human misery. And we've got to act proactively and market the things we need for health.
Thank you, Arthur. Maryann, your question is on migration. Australia accepts around 190,000 migrants annually. Is this number too high or too low? Please give us the rationale for your viewpoint.
Thank you. When I get questions like about migration, when I hear questions about migration, I always reflect on how Australia has become the country that it is, and it is built on migration. We have a low birth rate at the moment, and if we are to grow the country sustainably, then we should welcome migration. I think you're asking in terms of the intake of, did you say 190,000?
Yes.
In terms of the numbers, I think I have no problem with the number 190,000. Actually, I have no problem with more. The issue is how, and as a country, we deal with them. And we need to make sure that when we have migration, and the people come into this country, we provide the services and a place for them to live. What tends to happen is that they come here, we put them all in one area, and then we wonder why they're not growing with our communities. I actually think the migration question isn't about a number. It is about the way in which we handle the issue of people coming into our country in a welcoming way, where they can set up and then contribute back. And we've heard about the Snowy River scheme. We know what migration and people from other cultures bring to our country, but we do them no services whatsoever to say, by all means, come to the country, and then we leave them. And I think if we had a better system where we actually had migration policies which then took them to places to outside, instead of the grounds, we say, let's all go into Western Sydney, let's go into areas, and we put them in pockets, and then we wonder why they don't assimilate. I think it's not the number, it's how we deal with them.
Thank you, Maryann. Silvana, your question is on energy sources. There is a variety of sources available to generate electricity. These include coal, wind, solar, other renewables, nuclear, and clean coal. What percentage of each source do you believe we should be using?
Energy sources, yes, I love this topic. Sustainable, renewable energy sources. What percentage should we have in each of these? Well, we have to look at how it affects the health of people, number one, because your health is your wealth, and I've stated that this evening. We have to look, let's look at the windmills and the wind turbines. They've caused a lot of health issues to farmers and people. So we have to look at, is that the best way of sustainable renewable energy? We have to look at other areas that perhaps wouldn't be affecting farmers and affecting people. The coal seam gas, if you look at coal seam gas, we put out a 5-year moratorium in the last state election to stop that. The fracking is causing a lot of issues and problems to people's health. We know it's affecting our basin, the Darling Murray. We need to start looking at, I wouldn't be putting it into the coal seam gas, no. I wouldn't be putting it into the windmills for energy. Solar panels, I love solar panels. In the 70s, the solar panels were displayed at the Royal Leicester Show, and I remember thinking back then as a teenager of 16, you know what, one day I'd love to have those on my roof. I think that's a great way to go. If the government can subsidise that for Australians, absolutely, and water tanks and solar panels. Let's look at the things that are bringing health into this nation. We can see what those Mats did, the Mr. Fluffy, how we went ahead and did all of that, and the health issues. There's thousands of people with asbestos poisoning now due to that. We've really got to look at what is the best for the people.
Thank you, Silvana. Difficult question. Robert.
Looking forward to this one.
The heading I have written here is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender and intersex communities. The question is, it is apparent that there will be some form of determination as to whether Australia modifies its Marriage Act to allow same-sex marriages. Given the diversity of sexual nomination, do you envisage that marriage opportunity will be afforded to people who are either gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender or intersexual? Should any of these communities be excluded under new legislation?
Wow. I like the difficult, if you could try a little harder next time.
How is it difficult?
Well, let me say this. I've been married for 21 years and I'm heterosexual, so perhaps I'm not necessarily the best man to answer the question. However, I will say this. I know one thing. It doesn't matter where you go in the world or what community or culture you're from, we all want the same thing for our kids, we all want the same thing from our communities, and that is to be prosperous and happy. Australia's a very egalitarian and fair country, and it's one of the reasons why my grandfathers and my grandmothers' brothers came to this country, because we have a progressive society and we have great ideals. And it all boils down to having a fair go. And I think what people want to do is have equality of marriage. Okay? Now, the marriage has always been a sacrament of the church. And I was married in the church, and people used to say to me, well, where were you married? The registry or the church? I said, oh, the church. But I didn't realise I was actually signing two pieces of paper. One was for the church, and the other one was for the state. So effectively, we are all married by the state. That's why we get a certificate from the government called a marriage certificate. So I can't see why everyone can't have one of those. And Parliament United Party brought out a policy that basically says that why can't everyone have a civil union? And then if you want a marriage ceremony in a church, you'll find a church who'll marry you. Now, my wedding day was pretty phenomenal. I still remember it. It took me a while to pay it off, but that's another story. So the reality is that I got married where I was accepted because I'm Anglican and my wife is Orthodox. So not every church would marry us, and we're heterosexual. So on our most important day, we went to a church that was welcoming us. And I think on the most important day, that's where you go.
Thank you, Robert. Well handled. Let's go back to the mundane, I think. Trent. This is under Pacific Highway. The Pacific Highway between Hornsby and North Sydney is a federally funded road. How will you lobby to secure funding for crucial works required on the road? What projects do you consider to be of the highest priority?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually not quite sure that it is a federally funded road between Hornsby and North Sydney, but I'm prepared to stand corrected on that. But can I say that I think that we need to have a very balanced approach about transport. And in my role at work for the last 3 years, I've been an advocate for more investment in public transport. But it has to be a combination of both road and public transport. We can't have either or. But what I think the future for our city is going to be is looking at mass transit options that involve better public transport, because it is so vital to the livability and productivity of our cities. And to be honest, I'm actually really excited about the agenda that's being pursued by the state government at the moment. And I think the fact that we've got the Sydney Metro project being built through our area, which is going to increase the public transport options for residents in northern Sydney, is just so important. There's more that we need to do to improve public transport in our area, and I'd like to think that the next stage will be seeing public transport extended under Military Road, because that's going to be the only way to solve the road problems that we face there. But can I say that in relation to the Pacific Highway, we will see some changes coming into effect that is going to reduce the pressure on the highway, and most noticeably North Connects, which is going to get cars off the Pacific Highway and divert them through the tunnel that will join up with the M2, and I think that that's really important. There's also opportunities through the federal government to support black spots and to try and alleviate the pinch points as well, and that's something that I would be certainly pursuing with local councils to make sure that that happens. So it's got to be a mixture. I don't believe in a one form or other and nothing in between, but really if we're going to move people around our city most effectively, it's got to be through better mass transit options like better and improved railway networks. And can I say that one of the things that I've been fighting for the last 3 years, and I'm just so delighted and it's part of Malcolm's agenda, is to see the federal government investing in public transport, which is crucial to our cities.
Thank you, Trent. Stephen, your subject is deficits. What would be your plan to reduce annual budget deficits?
Well, I have an anaesthetist that works with me at North Shore Hospital called Stephen Barrett.
Yeah.
Now, he went to Normanhurst Boys High, as did his brother, who's 2 years older. Now, his brother went from the high school with a maximum pass in the high school certificate to Sydney University, where he did an engineering degree, and he graduated with first-class honours and the university medal in engineering. He then did a PhD, and in his postdoctoral studies went to MIT and did his postdoctorate studies there before forming his own company to make chips for Wi-Fi. Now, his father was a Qantas pilot, and he was captain of the Qantas 747 group. After 14 years, he floated his company making chips for Wi-Fi on the American Stock Exchange, and 12 years later, he sold his company for $400 million, more than Qantas is worth, $4.6 billion. Now, if we really want to do something about the deficit, we need to encourage our own scientists to stay in Australia and generate that income here. It's a disgrace that the CSIRO has been hit, that the Minister for Science has been hit, and that my registrars at North Shore Hospital, who've done high school certificates with UAIs of 99.95, a 6-year degree at Sydney University, and then an advanced training program where they talk to you people with great authority and panache about your MRI scan, and yet they don't know what the second element is in the periodic table of elements, because they've been dumbed down so far with the education system. We need to embrace science to get rid of the deficit. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Luke, your heading is Second Airport. Given the dismal patronage of the rail link to Mascot Airport, why would the government waste money on a rail link to the proposed Badgerys Creek Airport?
That's a great question. The other one is why we're having a second airport. I think the major problem with the current airport is that it takes quite a while to get there. Considering that the Sydney airport is actually one of the closest airports to the CBD of any country, any city in this country. In fact, closer than most countries in the world. It's a fantastic thing to actually have it so close. Yet, to take public transport, as Trent's talking about, to that airport, it costs you $17 just to get that last station. In fact, I've ridden to the airport a few times, surprise. But I've quite a number of times gone to Mascot and gotten off and grabbed a coffee, and breakfast, which is cheaper than going to the airport to do that. Paid for a cab, sat in traffic with everyone else, and still cost me between a coffee, breakfast, and cab less than taking the train home. About $5 less, and I didn't have to have airport food. We don't need another airport. If we do, we better connect it to public transport, because cabs currently cost about $50 to get out here, plus all the tolls. Yep, everyone's discussing their last cab fare now. Some of you got ripped off.
Yeah.
And yeah, but if you were to look at getting a couple of connections a bit closer to people's houses, be able to get shuttles to train stations, if you were to connect everyone up a little bit better, you wouldn't have to worry about building a whole other airport, having cabs the whole way out to the airport, and having slow shuttle buses the whole way out to the airport if you don't build the train. You could actually continue using the Sydney airport. You could get there quite quickly, and you could actually have a quite enjoyable trip. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. And thank you to everybody who's been putting in these questions. They've either come from people in the audience here or from people emailing to us. So look, it's proving to be very good. Let's do it again. So, your heading is political donations. How should political election campaigns be funded?
Yes, it is working. I just need to think about it for a moment. I think this goes back to me saying that there's too many lobby groups, there's too many special interest groups. I think the whole funding of political campaigns could be much more transparent, and I think the public needs to know a lot more about it. We're not told about this process. It's something we don't have a policy on yet. We're a brand new party. We haven't really discussed this, unfortunately. So I'm struggling to answer this question. The way we funded our party was to crowdfund. We the first party in Australia to crowdfund a party. So we had people who were saying to us, we are interested in the arts. We want to come forward and support the arts. We want a more artistic, creative and educated Australia, so we're prepared to put money into that. I think this is possibly the way of the future, to crowdfund. It's definitely the way of people putting on a show. It's definitely a way of people fundraising. I work at Royal North Shore Hospital. I see how fundraising works. I work for a charity. I work with numerous charities in different capacities. I can see the head of the volunteers at Royal North Shore Hospital here. Hello, Joy. So I see, and I think that is the way of the future, that crowdfunding will be the way forward. I just think that it needs to be a transparent process, so we need to know the companies putting political donations forward, and I think crowdfunding is probably the best way to do that.
William, your question is under the heading of agriculture. How would you propose to protect our farms and water catchments from coal and coal seam gas mining in Australia?
Thanks for the question. Again, our party was founded based on a sustainable Australia, sustainable living, and it's very much around these issues that we want to talk about, how we behave as a society, not just the number of people, but how we behave. In terms of coal seam gas, we have a policy for a moratorium on coal seam gas until we have a full and proper national discussion on the issue and make sure that local farmers have a say and that we're not affecting our water tables and the like around our agricultural land. So a complete moratorium until we've had a proper discussion away from the vested interests that push this issue. In terms of the coal mining, I told you a little bit about our climate and energy policy. We have a policy in many areas, including climate and energy. We're saying that we should phase out the fossil fuel subsidies, and that would make the major new coal mines much less profitable, and therefore we would see that money going into renewable energy technologies. We think that as far as the export and the depletion of our fossil fuels, that should be slowed down, and we should be transitioning to a renewable energy economy as quickly as possible. Certainly where that coal mining in any way affects our agricultural land, which is actually a sustainable industry, the farms and the agriculture must come first, and there should be no threats to the sustainability of our food security, especially in the light of climate change, where we may have a diminished amount of food available for future populations. One of the key things Australia has as an export is food, so we need to make sure that we protect that so that we can pay for ever-growing imports for an ever-growing population, it seems. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Sam, your question comes under transport. What is your view of new roads versus mass transit systems, trains, light rail, in the future of Sydney and New South Wales?
Thank you. There's obviously a mix is required. We do love our cars and we need those for particular occasions, so we're never going to see them go. But as a city becomes denser or congested, the demand for alternatives is naturally going to be greater, and many dense, highly populated cities around the world rely heavily on public transit, mass transit, and in a far superior way than the way we execute it, I must say, in Australia.
Thank you, Sam. Kerry, foreign policy. And I notice here in brackets ISIS. Given the serious threats in Australia and overseas, how do you propose keeping Australians safe without infringing on Australians' rights and liberties?
Hard one for me, but anyway. Probably my concept on that would be, or the party's concept on that would be that we are a free Australia, and we would like to maintain being a free Australia. And we have a lot of immigrants here with very mixed cultures, and we would like to respect that. And therefore, with the issues that ISIS holds or gives us as a country, we need to just make sure that our security, from vetting people that come into the country and issues that are going on, basically our security systems need to have monitoring, and people of perhaps suspicious natures need to perhaps be monitored and cared for. And I think what the government are doing right now is actually quite a good policy, in the sense that most Australians are safe, and where there is an issue, the government tends to take care of that from the point of view of investigating, following through. I think our security on our borders and areas like that are quite good. And if it's from an immigration point of view that people need to look at what's going on, I think the checks and crosses that the government are doing are sufficient. As far as the radicalisation of the young people that live in this country, I think the monitoring of that needs to be continued, because the young people are the ones who are going overseas, who are creating issues with ISIS, and therefore I think it's that monitoring that needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Kerry. James, heading for you is TAFE. What is your position on the erosion of TAFE as an education provider?
I went to a university for, I would say, a little bit too long. It's prepared me for a life of possible unemployment. I think that TAFE is actually really important to a certain section of our society. Not everyone needs to get a university degree, but everyone needs to have some skills so that their labour is valued. So when you start taking money away from TAFEs, you start reducing the expected earnings of the people in that part of society. People who come from less educated backgrounds are really suffering as a result of the cuts to TAFE. And I've seen that in my own family. There have been lots of problems with the administration of TAFE, situations where they've just lost enrolments, and thousands of people miss out on going to TAFE just because they did an administrative task poorly. So I think it's really important to maintain the funding of all levels of education, not just for the hyper elite, but everyone, so that they have a good expected earning in their lifetime, and to run it properly, because there's a lot of problems in the current TAFE system. Hopefully they've ironed them out. It was a reform process that caused some of these issues, but we need to make sure that it's run properly. Thank you.
No one saw that. Thank you, James. Arthur, government spending. What areas of overspending, red tape, or bureaucracies would you cut if elected? What policy areas are there where you feel more money should be spent?
Right, well, I think I said this in my introduction actually, thank you very much. For the Greens, we think we should stop bombing Syria, that'd be a very good start. We shouldn't be doing foreign wars. We don't need joint strike fighters, and it might be thought, if these are thought radical policies, when Trudeau was elected to Canada, he immediately pulled out of the war in Syria and cancelled the joint strike fight. That's what Canada has done, so this is not in any way a radical idea. I think we've got to stop giving things like the diesel fuel rebate, which of course makes coal a lot cheaper, as opposed to renewable energy. What use is that in a country that's trying to do something about climate change? I think in areas like capital gains tax, I think that's quite right. That has led to part of the boom in property, which has led to the difficulty in affordability in housing and the distortion of the whole economy as a speculative economy. I think negative gearing needs to be geared back, and although it may not be as great a problem as capital gains, it's still a very large problem in terms of distorting speculative money into housing. In revenue census, we need carbon tax and resource rental tax, because these are taxes that will help the environment and which will get us money from our assets that are going overseas to companies that are often foreign owned. We need a cap on superannuation, and we need foreign companies like Apple and Google to pay their share of the tax and not do lots of fiddles. That's how I think we're going to fix our problems. And I think in terms of where we need to spend more energy, it must be all this current paranoia, you know, there's a task force spending a fortune trying to stop welfare spending. The fact has to be recognised, and it was met by Piketty, the world's leading economist, which says that poor people spend almost all of their income and have the multiplier effect. Rich people spend 70% and don't get as good a multiplier. So we have to recognise that giving out, equalising income is good.
Thank you. Okay. Maryann, your subject is terminally ill. What support options should be made available to terminally ill patients? Do you support the voluntary use of a lethal injection to relieve suffering? And if not, why not?
Thank you for the question. It's one that's very close to my heart. Today's a year since my grandmother died, but it's 5 years since I lost my mum to cancer. And I nursed her at home in the months leading up to her death, because she didn't want to die in a hospital. She wanted to die at home. My mum didn't want to die. she told me she didn't want to die. She didn't want to leave us. I subsequently had another child, and we had a terrible period in our lives where my husband lost both his parents and I lost my mother. And watching that, I can't help but think that there has to be some dignity available to people at these times. We were very fortunate. We had a lovely setup. My parents lived in the Southern Highlands. We had somebody come every day. I was trained into how to provide my mum with pain relief, morphine, which I know gave her great relief. And from pain, I probably know that it brought her death on faster, but that was a relief, because at the end, she couldn't go on any longer, and we had to let her go. In terms of voluntary euthanasia, in principle I support people staying alive, but having watched it myself, there has to be some dignity as well. And if people really, there is no hope, and that's where we got to with my mum. She wasn't my mum anymore, and that's where I'll leave it.
Well, this one might be similar, but this one is immigration. What policy do you favour for handling the flow of asylum seekers to Australian shores?
Yes, it's a very sensitive issue because as Christians and also in this nation, we have a wonderful nation that's made up of wanting to reach out and help people. And the Good Samaritan story where we cross the road and we always look after that policy. And I know Dr. Ruff would vouch for this, that we don't ever look at the religion or the belief system. A human being is a human being, and we love them and we look after them no matter what. And that would be me, and that would be, I think we'd speak for most Australians, would I not? But I think we've got to look at the immigration at the moment and what's happening in the world. Yes, I've always been one to put up my hand and say, you know, we should be opening up a lot more and feeding people and looking after them. And like it was mentioned tonight, we need to have infrastructure in place. But the one thing that I still want to look at is that there is one Christian being killed every 5 minutes in the world. The studies have been done, you can look it up. And so we do need to look at prioritising Christians in this nation. We need to bring them in as well, the pregnant Christian women as well, with families that have been waiting in refugee camps for 5 years, waiting their turn and not getting on boats to come to this nation. Now that we've stopped the boats with Tony Abbott, that's been a good thing, and now we're looking at bringing the Syrian refugees in. But may I ask you, if they're coming, we're getting 100 in our area on the northern beaches, and of course I want to be part of looking after the Syrian refugees, but let's look at also making sure that they assimilate into our nation and that they follow one law for all Australians. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvana. Robert. Get some good ones. This is recreational drug use.
I think I'll have a drink tonight.
What should the government's role be with regards to recreational drug use? The role.
I'm trying to think of policy. I don't think we have a policy on that. I know if you follow the basics of not having government interference, there'd be somewhere where you could fit it in. But yeah, look, Colorado's mixing with very, very lax drugs laws in the states. They've had mixed success. I think a lot of it's been generated to raise revenue. In other words, they're saying if we grow this and sell it, we can tax it. I don't think that's the answer in this country. I always watch with great interest the RBT show, and particularly the one where they have the random drug testing as well. And some of these clowns behind the car wheel, thank God the cops are there catching them. So, yeah, I don't know. There may be a medicinal purpose for it, in which case, you know, I'd rather good medical professionals administrate it. But look, it's not something I can really comment on. I'd rather take advice, to be frank. I don't think I have the expertise to provide anything more than just a few random opinions. So thank you anyway for your time, but I'd rather be informed than be an ass and speak a whole lot of rubbish. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Trent, the internet. How should the federal government regulate the internet with respect to pornography, terrorist rants, and the collection of taxes for the sale of goods? Like me to repeat that?
No, sorry, I wasn't sure you finished. I thought the list might go longer. There are three separate issues that are encompassed by that question. Can I say that I think as far as possible we need a light touch in terms of the regulation that we have of people's right to use the internet, but there are some exceptions to that. And can I say that we do have laws that have been recently the subject of some discussion in relation to metadata, and I think that they're important laws for protecting our national security. And I think it's worthwhile stressing that in fact the laws that have just been through the federal parliament do not give the federal government any increased access to metadata that they didn't have previously. What they do is require telecommunications providers to keep those laws for a period of time. And can I say that there is not a major crime that's solved anymore in this country where police don't need access to some of those laws, some of that data, but I think particularly in the new paradigm where we have people who are determined to commit terrorist acts against Australian citizens, that the case for our security agencies having access to those that type of information is even more paramount. I think the final part of the question was GST. Yeah, in relation to pornography, I think the law as it currently stands is okay and should be maintained. I think that what people, so long as it's not violent or degrading, I think people should be able to watch what they want in their own homes. In relation to the sale of goods over the internet, I think it is fair that goods that have been purchased from overseas and brought into the country should be subject to the same GST regime as our local businesses selling those goods, because I do think it gives a very unfair disadvantage to internet sales that disadvantages our small business communities that need our support.
Thank you, Trent. Stephen, nuclear waste. Australia extracts, uses and exports nuclear materials. Where and how should the resulting nuclear waste be handled?
Nuclear waste, as we know it, is largely flown out of our reactors. And the nuclear waste that we have to deal with is largely plutonium out of our reactors. And fortunately, nuclear physics has progressed to a stage where with a little change to our current nuclear reactors, we can reinfuse the plutonium back into the reactor, produce U-237, which is in fact non-radioactive. So the best solution to the nuclear fuel problem, and you've got to remember that all the energy that we have indirectly comes from the sun, which is just a giant nuclear reactor. It's just hydrogen being converted to helium, 150 diameters of the sun away. It might be 93 million miles away, but in terms of the size of the sun, it's 150 diameters of the sun away. It's actually quite close. So we're warmed, in fact, by a nuclear reaction. We should, in fact, be warmed by a nuclear reaction if it's feasible, if it's safe, if it's economically viable by the nuclear process on the planet. Now, in the surface of the Earth we have uranium, but we also have an element called thorium, which is 3 times more abundant, and it actually can be used in a fast breeder reactor to produce energy equivalent to the uranium reactors, but it produces an end product that has a half-life of only 30 years. the half-life of the products that come out of the old reactors is 5,000 or 6,000 years, such that the storage of them becomes a major problem. We should have, when we had the opportunity, have taken every piece of plutonium that existed in the world and stored it in Central Australia. And now we'd be able to sell it back to the world to go back into the new reactors. The current reactors only need a smaller reactor. We're not going to get Hitachi and the other people to build thorium reactors because they're too expensive and they've already spent the money on the infrastructure.
Now Luke, the heading for you is governance. Polls show most voters don't think government works. What would you do to fix the underlying structures and systems that seem to be broken?
Oh, I get a good one. I only have 2 minutes. Firstly, what a night we have here. We're actually able to be involved in the democratic process. Might be a bit of a slim involvement. It might be only for a short time when there's another election next year. But we've got this process. I'm actually a bit of a nerd. I love numbers and I love looking at things quite deeply and seeing how they work. What I studied at university involved electoral systems. So we basically got it upside down in this country. We have a preferential ballot, which means you get pretty much one of 2 major parties at every local election, and we have a tablecloth that you have for the Senate, of which who knows what happens because everyone votes above the line and some preference seals are done, and you get a result. You could actually make a lot of changes by swapping that around and making a multi-member constituency for the lower house, so you actually have a chance of choosing between several members from the same party, even if you're not a voter for that party. And both ballots are a lot, about the same size, 20. You could also look at how much this whole council amalgamation issue at the moment. We're thinking a lot about what's happening at the local level, and that's really good. Local is so important to everyone. The problem is we have 3 levels of government, and we have multiple levels of government, even at those levels of government, the Senate and the House, to the point where we're actually overgoverned. We have more politicians per capita than almost any country in the world, and we're not getting a lot done. We're spending a lot of time trying to win votes by placing strategic projects in areas that we think will get those votes, instead of actually looking to the experts and looking at the evidence of how do we actually make this country move, how do we get moving along, and how do we innovate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to a final question that I'm going to ask you, and then we'll try something else. Final question, which you will all answer, is, and Lou, we'll start with you. What do you hope to achieve if you are elected? You have 2 minutes.
What do I hope to achieve? I hope to achieve a different voice in Parliament. Someone with different opinions, who's not swayed by party politics, who's not swayed by special interest groups or lobbying, who speaks up for the people of the electorate on their issues, who can provide a different voice in the House of Representatives, who can bring some fresh ideas to Parliament, who can represent the people of North Sydney. I was born and bred in North Sydney. I grew up under Carol Baker and Ted Mack, people who had brilliant ideas, who really wanted to represent the people of the electorate. So I think being someone who's from a small party, who's not tied down by the weight of years of lobby groups and special interest groups, I can speak for the people of North Sydney rather than a party. Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou. William, same question.
Thanks for the question. What I want to achieve for the people of North Sydney is to be a local representative that really hits on the local issues that matter to our quality of life. We know that we're concerned about overdevelopment. We know that we're concerned about the fact our children can't get into a local school. We know that we're concerned about the congestion on the road. We're concerned about the fact that housing is tremendously expensive. And we need to link these problems, these growing problems, back to root causes rather than just dealing with symptoms. We have a finite environment and a finite space at North Sydney. Australia's had a very successful long-term period of population growth, but you can't grow forever. And we have to realise that we've reached adulthood, and for a sustainable Australia, we have to think better, not bigger. We know that over the 20th century, the average immigration level was around 70,000 per year. Incredibly successful immigration to Australia. But going forward, for big business, the big parties have increased that, have tripled that. Now we have rapid population growth that is touching on all of our local issues. So we have to both deal with the causes and the symptoms at the same time. I want to be someone that actually drills down and deals with the causes. If you want to have an ever-increasing population, we will lose our quality of life in North Sydney. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking for your vote tonight. I'm asking you to think better, not bigger, and give me your #1 vote on the ballot paper to send a message to the major parties and to the Liberal Party that they cannot take this electorate for granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm standing for less government, more freedom and lower taxes. Too often we see government waste and the size of government growing, and we've already had the question asked about how can we make government run better. My view is just make it smaller. My business experience, I've got a lot of that. I have a lot of lessons from successes and mistakes, and I think that will make it's real world. I've challenged government agencies and bureaucrats and industry standards and practices, and had to work my way through and challenge all of those things in the real world, and have borne the prices and had some victories in many of those ways. So I know how it operates for businesses because I've been doing it. I want to show that small, lean, effective government can still be effective. Low taxes mean that people have the money that they've earned to do with what they want. It's not good for the government to take it to do with what they prefer, to look after their powerful interest group, their donor, whichever is going to provide the most votes. Low taxes will provide the best outcomes for individuals and businesses. The innovation that we would get from a low, rather than preferencing one sector or the other, the innovation just from lowering the company tax rate. In Israel, they lowered the company tax rate from 36% to 18%, and now it's known as an IT sort of generator, a hub of IT. And I also stand for individual liberty. End the nanny state. Get the government out of our wallets, out of our houses, out of our homes. Stop the surveillance. Stop them telling us to fill this form in, pay that fee. You know, all those things that we have to labour on with. And I want to challenge the big incumbents' natural instincts to do that to us.
What drives you back into Parliament? Well, I guess being a single policy party at this point, the main issue for us is to bring law reform. But in doing that, the people of North Sydney worked very hard bringing your policies to Parliament so that things that you need within the area are taken care of, such as the schooling issues, overdevelopment, roads, transport, and all the other issues that people have talked about tonight. I think the voice of the people is what's important. I think the democratic right of the people is what's important. And those thoughts should be taken to the government and should be listened to. from my own point of view as the party, we'd also like to bring a bill forward for the rights of the individual to have a choice. We think that's most important. None of the major policies, major parties have this as policies. The Greens were moving on it, but unfortunately it's not even part of their program at the moment. You can't see it on the internet, and it's not on the 54-page party policy at the moment. So it has become a very big issue for us, particularly after Andrew Denton did a wonderful talk at the Wheeler Centre, and you've probably seen him on Q&A. He put the policy to the people to discuss and for us to open up conversation on our issue. And our current leader, Mr Turnbull, said the day after that, not on his watch basically, that voluntary euthanasia will not happen. So I would work very hard for that, of course, but I'd also work very hard for people on their local issues and take policy back to the Parliament.
Thank you, Kerry. This election is for one seat, and the Liberal government will be in power no matter what happens after this election. So the question is, what sort of person do we want to have elected? Do we want to have a Joe Hockey friend at, being in this seat, or do you want to have someone who's got some lively things to say, to debate with the government about in Parliament? And I think that I will offer that if I were elected in North Sydney. I'd be taking it to the government that we should have a dedicated science minister and we should be increasing science funding. I'd be taking it to the government that they should reform the education funding system to make it more fair and to increase the level of funding. I'd be taking it to the government that we'd be protecting the environment, and Trent Zimmerman's leaflet says he believes in a sustainable environment. Will he support a carbon emission trading scheme or not? Because that's actually one of the most important environmental issues at the moment. So if I were elected, I would be arguing for that very strongly. It would be interesting to know if he would be arguing for that. I would be arguing for better funding for public health care. I would be arguing for marriage equality. I'd be arguing the Liberal Party line, which is open for business. Tony Abbott said open for business on election night, and he didn't follow through. Malcolm Turnbull, our current Prime Minister, when he was Communications Minister, he sued TPG for installing the NBN that the government wouldn't, because the government is determined to hold on to their monopoly. We would actually be pushing forward with good economic policies. I would be arguing that, and it would be interesting to hear if Trent Zimmerman would do the same. Thank you.
Yeah. The Greens stand for real change, and I'd be pushing that. Years ago, when I started to campaign against tobacco, the most radical group campaigning against tobacco was the Cancer Council, and on the other side we had the tobacco industry, the advertising industry, and the government sat in the middle between those two and did very little. I wrote them letters for a while, realised the government was needed to take on an industry this big, realised the government wasn't going to do anything, and joined the people who were spraying billboards. We were the most radical group. Everyone else became a moderate. Overnight, we redefined the poles of the debate. And then the middle of the debate was much closer to the Cancer Council than it had been before. So basically, you have to grab the debate, you have to say something that's real and meaningful, you have to have a meaningful alternative program. The Greens have got that. And I believe we have to redefine the way politics works. And you may know, I spent nearly 9 years in the New South Wales Parliament as a Democrat. And one of the Labor Party people said to me, "It's no use talking to you, Arthur. You just make up your mind based on the facts." But he thought that was a criticism. But that's what I do. I basically have a scientific background as a medical person. I do make up my mind on the facts, and when you get the facts, you say, well, hang on, forget about the lobbies, this is what the facts are, and that's what's needed, a voice that says that. I believe the Greens raft for policies which stand really for the environment, for the future, for human decency, for facts, not special interests, and I have a particular interest in preventive health and the support of Medicare, so that your health care depends on how sick you are, not how rich you are. And that's an absolutely fundamental principle which has been continually undermined by the present government. So, and then I'll stand up for the local people because I think that's where my loyalty lies, that's where the power lies, and that's what my job is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The reason, what I would like to achieve is to effect change. And I agree, we're not going to change the government. But what we can change is the way that the people of North Sydney are represented and not be taken for granted as a Liberal seat that someone just decides to leave mid-term. And then we have an undemocratic way of electing the replacement. We're not voting for Malcolm Turnbull in this election. Despite the pamphlets that come out, we don't elect the Prime Minister, we elect our local member. In terms of what I would like to see, a world-leading education system. I'm a teacher. Our education system is letting us down. It requires not only funding, but it also requires the drive. This should be our greatest export opportunity. To think that the standards of our students at the moment are way below what they should be is just distressing. And it's not just about the buildings. I would like to see better access to quality childcare. I've been the president of an occasional childcare centre. And there is more than just having long daycare centres with 50% rebates, which the prices go up and up and up. I would like to see appropriate planning policies, and this is something I'm already doing in my role representing the North Sydney local government on council. Recently, council just had a big win. We actually had the state government planning panel rejected an enormous development that was to go up in Crow's Nest St Leonard's. 50 towers, absolutely enormous. It was because of the local policies that had been carefully put in by council that this was rejected. I have runs on the board for representing North Sydney, and I'd like to do it at the federal level.
It says what we hope to achieve. I believe I will achieve it. Because as I said at the beginning, our real problems today are not economic, they're not even political. Our real problems today are a lack of good character, values and common decency. I want to restore these back into public policy. Where do I want to start with that? Of course, in North Sydney. There's over 100,000 residents. We've looked at education, we've looked at health, we've looked at roads infrastructure. I actually love working with the locals and collaborating with them and giving them forums, and I will hear you and I will listen to you on the issues because I am by the people, for the people, of the people. I have a compassionate heart, I'm caring, and I will listen to you and exercise that. On a federal level, I will look at one law for all Australians. Our greatest threat at the moment is ISIL and what's happening with terrorism. I want security for the most greatest nation on this earth, Australia, our homeland, our own land. This is the nation that my parents came to in the 50s as immigrants and have worked in a working class family and raised me to be patriotic and love my nation. And my father at 17 years of age couldn't wait when he got off that ship to go to the immigration office and become an Aussie at 17. I was never entitled to an Italian passport because my parents couldn't wait to be Australians. I love Australia, I embrace it. Let's embrace it, let's protect it. Let's be jealous of our nation and what we have. Let's really keep the security happening and look after it. Like I said, Mary McKellar, never see a need without doing something about it. You present something to me, I will look after you. I have a track record of compassion, and if you look it up on the webpage, it's there.
Hallelujah.
As I said, it's always a difficult act to follow. I'm Rob Marks, and I appreciate your time this evening. If you vote Palmer United Party, this is what I'll do. I'll stop the forced council amalgamation. I will stop the sell-off of Royal North Shore Hospital. I will stop the GST increase. I will double, and it can be done, I will double the specific hostels for women who are victims of domestic violence. There were 70 homicides last year from domestic violence. As I said, we have a 24-hour hotline for terrorism, but you can't call half or 50% of the state's domestic violence hostels after 5 o'clock. There's a problem. Okay? And I will stand for marriage equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you again for the opportunity for us all to participate tonight. But can I say that if I'm elected as the member for North Sydney, I want to be remembered as someone who was an accessible and hard-working MP that actually delivered results for the local community after listening to what the local community needed. And I have a history of being prepared to fight, even occasionally fight my own party. There have been many issues upon which I've had to disagree and argue a counter case. And can I say that more broadly, I want to be part of the government, as part of Malcolm Turnbull's agenda, to provide better support to our cities, because we have to be so much smarter about the way that we plan for the services that our cities need. And North Sydney is a microcosm of the problems that Sydney faces and our other large metropolitan areas face. So that means that we need to get the planning right so that we're not simply building new apartments and new housing without thinking about the implications for our schools, without thinking about the implications for our public transport network, without thinking about how we're going to provide the recreational and sporting needs that changing demographics and the younger population will bring to our area, without thinking about the other services, be it health or other facilities, that aged care facilities that citizens need in a well-planned and functioning city. I'm very optimistic about the future of Sydney. I'm very optimistic about the future of Australia. But there are some things that we just simply have to do a lot better, and planning our cities is one of them. And can I say finally that for me in North Sydney we have phenomenal opportunities to take advantage of those economic developments in our own region. We're already an IT hub. We're already a major centre for the service industry. We need to support our local businesses and therefore the jobs that we provide to young people and people generally in our area by making sure that they're connected up to those opportunities that we're seeing in Asia and are reflected through the free trade agreements. And I've already been talking with the Chambers of Commerce, and I know that we can achieve that. But in me, I can guarantee that you'll be a hard-working and effective member of Malcolm Turnbull's team that will fight for progressive liberal values in the same way that Malcolm Turnbull does.
Thank you. 2,500 years ago, a blind Greek poet called Homer wrote a story called The Odyssey, and it was a story of a man called Odysseus coming back from the Trojan Wars, got caught up for 20 years. When he finally got home, found that the suitors were trying to take his wife off him, and no one recognised him except the swineherd. When he finally convinced his son, who was 2 when he left and now 22, that he'd come home, he said, "We're going to fight these people in the Great Hall, and what I want you to do is to sneak in and take all of the spears and the swords off the wall so that their great numbers won't be a disadvantage against our few." And his son said, "Won't they be suspicious?" And he said, "No, there'll be wine there. So tell them the presence of wine, the mere presence of wine, in association with a weapon may provoke a man to use it." Wouldn't it be wonderful if the National Rifle Association of the United States learnt that lesson from 2,500 years ago? What I want to do when I get in Parliament is make sure that we haven't forgotten the lessons of the past. You don't sell major assets that are important. You don't have government that becomes too big and too unwieldy. You stop the amalgamation of forced amalgamation of councils and reduce the size of middle government, which is the state government. You change the transport system to match the telecommunication system, and you make housing affordable for young kids by getting rid of this nonsense of buying strike fighters for $16 billion with helmets for $770,000, and I'll be fighting for that every day. Thank you.
I guess I have to start with a quote too then. H.G. Wells said, "Every time I see an adult on a bicycle, I no longer despair the future of the human race." So, I'm running as a representative of the Australian Cyclists Party because I want to get Australia moving. I want evidence-based policy to make Aussies happier, healthier and safer, and to save a truckload of money in the process. So, how do we make Australians happier? Well, when surveyed, people walking and riding for their commute to work reported much higher levels of happiness. How do we make Australians healthier? Well, the top 10 causes of death, the first 4 and the 6 through 10 are all health issues that could easily be helped by more activity. Do you know what number 5 is? Access is safer. Well, secondly, many parents deem the footpaths too unsafe for their kids to ride to school, and roads are completely out of the question. Personally, I want to raise kids in North Sydney, and I want my kids to be able to ride to school, and to walk to school, to walk to the bus stop and get there on their own. I don't want to be playing chauffeur. So, I'm asking North Sydney to use their first preference vote. You've got many preferences to choose from. I don't care about your ideology. We're an amazing community, but we have some of Sydney's worst commutes, the country's worst commutes, and it's killing us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, look, we'll end the panel session here, which will also give audience a chance to have one-on-one sessions with the candidates if they wish after this. Firstly, there's a few people I'd like to thank for this evening. The individual progress associations that put so much into this, but certain people particularly. Rob Coote on the mic behind me. Come in on the corner there, Terry Fogarty and Kate Westerby, who collated all the questions. And of course, Diana Jones on the bell. Thank you to the media for coming along this evening. It was very much appreciated. Nice to see you. Another little ad coming up now. I know you had a great time tonight. There's more, if you'd like it. There's a Meet the Candidates Forum at Lane Cove Plaza this Sunday, the 29th of November, 1:30 to 3:30. This is the weekly times in the Lane Cove Community Forum. Invite residents of Lane Cove and the North Sydney electorate to attend a Meet the Candidates Forum chaired by Don Murchison in the Lane Cove Plaza on Sunday. That's this Sunday, the 29th of November, if you haven't had enough. All right, now let me see. Now I'd like to thank all our wonderful candidates who really handled some very dodgy questions that came at them, and probably weren't expecting some of them, and you really handled it all very well, and we thank you all very much for coming along. Now I'm going to name people. I'd like you to hold any stamping of feet and clapping of hands and all this sort of thing to perhaps December the 5th. Or just out of respect for other candidates, please hold it all to the end. Okay. There are 104,352 electors on the roll. There are 13 candidates. 12 turned up today, which we're very grateful to see, for the seat that was held by the former MP, the Federal Treasurer, Joe Hockey. So, all right, so let's start with thank you very much to Luke Pollard from the Arts Party. William Bourke, Sustainable Population Party. Sam KENNARD, Liberal Democrats. Kerry Susanne Bronson from the Voluntary Euthanasia Party. James Jansson, Future Party. Arthur Chesterfield-EVANS, the Greens. Maryann BEREGI, Independent. Silvana NERO, Christian Democrat Party. Robert James Marks from the Australian United Party. Trent ZIMMERMAN, Liberal. RUFF, Independent. and Luke Freeman, the Australian Cyclists. Thank you all very much. I think I've just covered just about everything. On behalf of the Federation of Willoughby Progress Associations, thank you all for coming along. You've really made this a good night. So thank you all very much and good night.